Yeah, so over the past couple of years, probably months, that I've been the host of my podcast, The Switch Show, I've come to learn a couple of things when it comes to, being responsible and being in control. Okay, so because I am the sole operator of this podcast, I know that I am responsible for everything when things like the media, outputs, the recordings, the editing, the sound, and stuff like that. So I know that I should be able to do things, or should I say produce the best quality of things, or things that I should be able to produce at my very best. Okay, so at the same time, I know that I can get hands to help me. I know that I can get help, either through volunteering, ask a couple of friends, like, could you help me? Could you just volunteer to help me and something like that? I know that I could also go the employment route and employ hands, to help. And yeah, so either of these options I choose, I know that at some point, I have control over every decision and every choice that is made. But when I start employing hands, it's my leadership, but I'm not necessarily in control of every situation. Okay, welcome to the Switch Show. And if you're wondering why I took that route, as the intro, I'll be talking about abuse, man's quest for control. Now the thing is, be you an employer, be you a sole proprietor, be you a president of a firm or an aspiring president of a nation, you should know that humans are thirsty. Humans are hungry. We're like lions. We want to be in control of situations. We would like to influence every decision, every passing breath, every thought that comes up. We would like to influence it at some point in our lives. But yeah, the thing is, we can never be in total control of every situation or every circumstance that happens to go around us. Now, with this idea, man can sometimes be led to abuse the power that has been given to him. Let's take myself for example. I've been in positions for the many years I've lived on this earth. I've been in positions of leadership. When you are called as a class representative, if Nigerian secondary school students would understand, here in Nigeria here, we have class representatives, or we call them class captains, in our secondary schools. So I've been privileged to be tagged as a class captain or a class rep, and over those times, I noticed that, you either have to take this authoritarian kind of approach to things, or be this very passive person, or you can be democratic. So in leadership, we don't go for being an authoritarian, and you are not passive. So you have to be democratic, and democracy is like the line in between being an autocratic person that is exercising all of your above other people's own active and just let them roll with what they want. I'm a people's person, all those times. And sometimes I showed empathy, I was very lenient. I would show compassion, I would show mercy. Usually there were punishment for people that noisemaker, punishment for people that were tyrants, showed some form of tyrant and truants. But I was very lenient. Each time a teacher or the principal, why is this class? Who are the people? Where's the captain? And it's to me like, oh, that's, I'm like, yeah, the class wasn't really trying to make up an excuse for people. Now, people really, all people shout. A lot of people like that. You use this for them. You them some form of. But all these things, even though it's not a good system of leadership, it's some form of control over the. To them, in their subconscious, they felt like me some like this guy is always covering up. He's always covering tracks. We owe him to do, to be obedient, to listen to directives, his opinions, make decisions based on the decisions he has made for us, something like that. Now, I had every right at that little age to exercise authoritative ruling, some authority kind of, probably like a dictator kind of system of government in my little. I had the right, I had the opportunity to do so. Because if I had disappointed myself and said, okay, because you all, I'm all guys a free hand, you all are going to do my assignment for me. You guys are going to notes in class, you guys are going to help me bag and everything. This thing would only be a while. And if it feeds to me, my relationship with my classmates becomes an one when things like blackmail come up. You'll be like, if you don't do this, tell the teacher that you were caught at the back of the with one girl. You guys were doing something that's against. You guys were playing different form of role play, as Nigerians would say, as Nigerian kids would say. You guys are doing mommy, something like that. But side shaft, that youth abusive leader, and these become subject to micro. Over time, when they get tired, decide to move me. But in that time, I con every single thing too, because they give power to. Okay, so abuse. The dictionary definition of abuse is improper use, or that's what I explained with this story. It's a corrupt practice similar to the I just gave. So when the purpose of a thing is not known, it is inevitable. And one thing, let me use it as a representative of things, isn't just matters. Let me say humans things, but let's just say that human being. But when you don't know the purpose of the people around you, know the purpose of what they placed you in a capacity or in a leading capacity, you tend to use that power that you're given. Now, it's not just input in a leading capacity. When you have control over yourself, you know the purpose for which created you to be, for which God has placed you on this earth. You start abusing the opportunities that you get, start abusing even your own. You urge or you do practices could lead to drug abuse because of form of emotional downtime or something like that. You do not know your purpose, and the only way to know is to know what God has called you, what God has created to do and to be on earth, is to spend time with God. You cannot believe in something and listen to their idea and follow in it. You cannot God and not be listen to what God has for you. It makes sense. It's an I believe in God, but I'm standing on my own truth. I don't really care what God says. God has ear for His free will. I also have ears too. That is another thing that could lead to the idea of subjective. The objective reality, and they are your feelings, which are subjective reality. But because man cannot wield the objective reality to his own interest, they tend to shift to activity in order to coerce, play into their emotions, do some kind of psychological mind trickery, give them this illusion they're leading their abusive system that most times are aware of until it is extremely. People are sometimes controlled by the behemoth feeling of success and fame at all costs, considering the consequences of their actions and inactions. Now, this drive for like say fulfillment, this drive for action could lead to enter into abusive relation and abusive net just so they could also make someone become an abuse just because succeed. They abuse capacity that they've been given. They have the opportunities that people have given, and it becomes a whole mess, whole blob of snort, so to say. Why is abuse still existent in modern day civilization? You see scientists about human beings from the Homo habilis into the erectus are tagged as Homo sapiens. It seems like as it's there, with the trajectory of civilization, it seems like as human evolved, as civilization and technology grew, abuse came worse. Because if you consider the ideas of the science, with the plotted on how civilization went through, you see that back then even more organisms, there was more respect, then than even now. Although yes, there were instances of abuse of power in the past, but it seems like with the advent of tech, abuse is more, but it's somewhat disguised and somewhat covered in a shell, that people are being abused and they don't even recognize it because they are so captured, so fixated on technology advancements that they forget every other aspect of their lives. That's it. That's it basically. Because man's quest for control leads them to use things that are not necessarily under control. I'll cap with something I call this an effect. So if you the movie Spider-Man, that stars Maguire, his Uncle Ben told with great power comes responsibility. And No Way Home, starring Spider-Man, his Aunt May repeats the same thing. Great power comes great ability. So the extent of power that you've been granted determines the extent of responsibility that you are meted with. So if you are to be responsible for yourself, because you have power over yourself before you have power over any other person, before people's choice. So if you're not control yourself, if you're not able to power over yourself to be responsible when you're placed in instances of leadership, you will not be able to function effectively. And sometimes functioning effectively can lead you to become an abused person. Just you want to get things and you want to make sure everybody sees you or as an influencer. So this is kind of timely. We are in the end of election, so the exercise, shows your actions influence things on a larger scale. We'll talk about something like that in something like some people will know as the butterfly effect. Talk about that in another episode. Go and be the change that they need, but they don't know that they need. Be the change that they need. Not want. Be the light of God, spreading the word of God. Flip that, illuminate. See you all, and I'll see you on the next one.